Good afternoon. Good afternoon. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the interface of the laws of inheritance and the Daf Yomi. I always love it when the portion of the week has a connection with the Daf Yomi, and so today's Daf Yomi connects to the portion of the week. Where does it connect to it? It connects to the division of the land. So the Torah tells us in this week's portion is Pinchas, and the Torah tells us in the third Aliyah that to these people you shall divide up the land, but not b'mispar shemot. To a big tribe you're going to give a big inheritance, and to a small tribe you're going to give a small inheritance. But it was done by a lottery, so how would that work? Each one according to his number will get his inheritance, but it will be done by a lottery. So the land was given out by the lottery, but the lottery system worked so that it was divinely, miraculously transmitted that the larger tribes got the larger land and the smaller tribes got the smaller land. So how did that work? So basically Rashi describes how it worked, that Moshe divided the land into areas of equal value, equal fertility, and it was divided into 12 areas, or I don't know exactly 12 because the tribe of Levi didn't get one, but Joseph had two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, but Reuben and Gad were on the other side of the Jordan River. Then what happened was the names of the 12 tribes were written on a lot, and also the name of these 12 areas were written on a lot, and all these were put into a box. And then Moshe dressed Elazar the Kohen Gadol in his priestly garments, and including within that were the Urim V'Tumim, which was the oracle. And then the princes of each tribe came up one at a time, and they stuck their hand in the box, and they pulled out two lots. And miraculously, it happened that each prince pulled out the lot with their name on it, and then they pulled out the lot with the district that they were going to get. So it worked out through divine direction that each prince and each tribe got the area that they were dedicated to get. And then the lottery spoke. The lot itself actually spoke. As it says in the verse, that the lottery actually spoke up and said, Al pi hagoral, meaning to say that the lot itself actually spoke. And they said, I, the lot of such and such a region, have become the inheritance of such and such a tribe. Now Rashi tells us something, and then the Talmud in today's Daf Yomi tells us something else. So Rashi tells us that this was an example of the dead inheriting the living inheriting the dead. That normally we say that the dead inherit the living, but in this case, the living were inheriting the dead. What does Rashi mean by this idea that in this case, the living were inheriting the dead? So Rashi tells us what we mean by that. Then normally, if, let's say, Reuven would have two sons, and these two sons would have gone into the land with Reuven, then the two sons would have each split Reuven's portion. But that's not the way it worked in this case. In this case, let's say we have an example of the following. Let's say there was two brothers who left Egypt, and one of their brothers had one child, Rashi says, and the other brother had three children. So then going in, and they were the ones who went into the land. So on the basis of the fact that one had three children and the other one had three sons and the other one had one son, we're going to say that they would be getting, one would be getting three and one would be getting one. But we don't say that. We say it goes back to their father who left Egypt, or who was in Egypt, and he was considered to have 4 shares. And so the 2 brothers then split the 2 shares, and they each split the 4 shares, and so they each got 2 shares. And that's how we're going to get the living inheriting the dead. That's what Rashi says. Now, here's the part that was considered from today's Daf Yomi. We know that the land, this is called, the land that was divided was called the fields of inheritance. The Stei Achuzah, these are the fields of inheritance. And what this means is that in the Jubilee year, any field, there are 2 types of fields. There are fields that you acquire and the fields that you inherit. One is called a Stei Mikna, one is called a Stei Achuzah. If it's a field that you inherit, even if you sold this field to someone else, then at the Jubilee year, at the end of the 50th year, the field is going to go back to you at the end of the 50th year. The field's going to go back to you at the Jubilee year. So this is the concept. Hold on 1 second. 1 second, 1 second. 1 second. Oh, where is this?
This? No, I don't mean that. But is this still in the desert, or they're planning for when they get?
They're dividing the land. They're dividing the land when they get into the land of Israel. That's when the land of Canaan. That's when the land is going to take effect. That's when these laws are going to take effect, when they get into the land of Canaan. So the Jubilee year is going to, all the land is going to return in the Jubilee year to its original owner. But the Talmud has a discussion. Hold on 1 second, just I'm going to get to everybody's questions in 1 second. Talmud has a law today as follows. So this is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud, that let's say there was a man who goes into the land of Canaan, and he has his portion. Let's say Reuven has portion, and after he dies, he leaves behind 2 sons. And so he has 2, let's say Reuven has 1 big field, and they split the field equally into field A and field B. Field A and field B. Now comes the Jubilee year. Do we say, when we look at this field, do we now say that the field goes back to its original owner, i.e. their father, the estate, and now it gets subdivided again between them? And this can be relevant because let's say the field that Reuven got became worth, that Reuven gave to, let's say field A that he gave to 1 son, became worth a lot more than field B. And now the Jubilee year comes and they divide it again amongst themselves. Or do we say, no, that they inherited the land, so it remains a Stei Achuzah, remains a field of inheritance, and it doesn't go back to the original owner. It's only if they sold it that it goes back to the original owner, not for when they purchased it. So Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud says that we're going to look at the 2 brothers who are getting their division, their inheritance land, as though they were purchasers, meaning even the brothers have not really inherited it. Even when you inherit the land, it's called like purchasing the land, and it goes back to its original owner. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud. And so the fact is, we now have to really recognize that what does it mean to inherit? Inherit means something totally different than we had imagined. That the Rebbe says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, that the field of inheritance is a concept, that inheritance refers to the fact that we are a part of God. We are an achuzah, we're part of God's nation, part of God's destiny. And so therefore, the heir is automatically becoming part of their parent's property. So he becomes his parent. There's another concept here about inheritance. This might sound shocking to people. I hope it doesn't scare people, but I'm going to share this with you. The Talmud tells us, we know that on the day, Rahman al-Tzlan, of a death, we're supposed to say a blessing of Dayan Hayamet. Anybody, I'm sure people have heard of that blessing. When somebody dies, you have to say the blessing of Baruch Dayan Hayamet. Blessed is the one who is the true judge. It shows that in the moments, in the darkest moments, we recognize that Hashem is the true judge. But the Talmud tells us, and I never really saw this practice today, but the Talmud tells us that if a person dies and he really only leaves behind 1 heir, so that 1 heir is going to inherit everything, then there's another blessing that's said at the time of the death, and that's the blessing of Shechiyanu. Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'yanu azman hazeh, which is normally said, very happy occasion. And why is that blessing recited? The reason why that blessing is recited is because because that person is inheriting. The person's inheriting a lot of money, and so therefore he's on one hand very upset that his loved one has died. On the other hand, there's some good news for that person that they've inherited money. So I always found that very difficult, but I want to suggest that there's also an aspect to it which is very powerful, and the aspect to it that's very powerful is that the person is not just inheriting money, but he's inheriting the spiritual position, that it's a blessing, recognizing the ownership. He is becoming spiritually, he's stepping into the shoes of his parent and becoming the spiritual heir. So it's not just about the money, that the person has an elevated spiritual position, and that's also part of the laws of inheritance. The Talmud also says in this context that we look at the acquisition of, that we rule actually, that the kinyan of the peiros, that the acquisition of the rights to the fruits of the land are really not like you've acquired the land. And in that sense, the person has never actually acquired the land. That's Reish Lakish's position. Reish Lakish is saying that somebody who just has the rights to the fruits really never acquires the land. So according to Reish Lakish, none of us then have ever acquired land. Nobody will ever really, really acquire the land, because after the first generation, everybody really is just a purchaser of the land. And so since they're just a purchaser of the land, and we'll go back in the Jubilee year. And so because of that, nobody really owns land. They only own the rights to use the land. A very, very important point. So let me pause. I know I saw some people wanted to ask some questions. Let me stop here for a second and take some questions.